Today's lesson is about Darwin's theory of evolution. So, to begin with, when we talk about evolution, we're talking about change over time. This is the process that we believe led to the modern organisms that we have today because they've descended from ancient organisms with modifications over time. And the person who came up with this theory to begin with is a person named Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was an English naturalist. He came from a very wealthy family. And after he finished college, he got the opportunity to go on a mapping vessel, the HMS Beagle, that visited South America and the Galapagos Islands and also traveled all the way around the world. And so in the process of this journey that lasted several years long, he made a lot of observations and collected a lot of specimens that led him to come up with his theories. This shows you kind of the journey that they took from England along the coast of South America to the Galapagos Islands here, and then around to Australia and the Indian Archipelago here, and then to South Africa and back to South America and back up to England. And it took about 4 or 5 years to make this journey. In the process, he did a lot of exploration in the interior of South America. Saw lots of different specimens. When they got to the Galapagos Islands here off the coast of Ecuador, saw differences in the same kinds of organisms on each island, but they were slightly different from each other. And through his observation over time, he began to realize that the organisms here were descended from ones that had come from the coast, from South America, and gradually made their way across. And they had slightly different adaptations because they lived in different kinds of environments. And so when he returned from his journey, he began to write down his observations and came up with what we now call the theory of natural selection. So let's look at the points of Darwin's theory. First of all, there's variety in populations. We know this just by looking around the classroom. We can see that there are no two people that look exactly alike. Even identical twins are usually slightly different. And so in a population of the same species, like these ladybugs here, there's going to be variation, and that variation is inherited from the parents. These are all members of the same species of garter snakes, but they look very, very different because they live in different habitats and inherited different characteristics from their parents. So there is variety in populations. Secondly, more offspring are produced than can survive. So there's a struggle for existence. And you see that here with the pigs. Because there's so many babies, it's going to be hard for all of them to get the same amount of nourishment from the mother. And that's true in nature. When you have animals like the sea turtles that lay hundreds of eggs and only a few eventually make it to adult organisms because they get picked off along the way, there's definitely a struggle for existence. Third, the ones that survive are the ones that, because of the variations that they inherited, have advantages or disadvantages in that struggle for existence. The ones that have the variations that help them the most are the ones that survive to reproduce, and that's the important part. They have to survive and reproduce to pass on those genes to future generations. Because those fittest or the most fit ones survive to reproduce, over time their characteristics are going to be more dominant in the population, and the species over time is going to change or evolve in ways that leads to different kinds of outcomes than they had to begin with. And then finally, the species alive today are descended with modification from ancestral species. The adaptations that are there, the traits in the organism that make them more successful in their environment, lead to changes over time. And this is a result of something called natural selection, okay, because it happens by means of nature rather than by man. To summarize natural selection, okay, we have inheritable variations in individuals. We have overproduction of offspring. Those are observations that you can make just by looking at populations of organisms. The individuals that are best suited to the environment are going to tend to survive and leave more offspring, and over time those favorable traits will accumulate in the population, leading to change in the population in the species over time. Now there's also such a thing as artificial selection, okay? This is something that we do by what we choose, and so all of these different plants that you can eat, broccoli and kale and Brussels sprouts and cabbage, kohlrabi, all come from the wild mustard. They're variants of the wild mustard plant, okay? But because people have selected for different variations, we have all these different varieties of of food from the same ancestral plant. They're all related to each other. They're strongly interrelated, but this one selected for the leaves, this one selected for the buds, this one selected for the flowers to produce different kinds of products in the end. Now, Darwin was not the only person to come up with a theory of evolution. There was another man named Russell Wallace, who was working at the same time as Darwin, and Darwin beat him to the punch as far as publication goes. And there were other scientists as well. Sometimes they came up with erroneous ideas. One erroneous idea was propagated by a man named Lamarck, and his idea was that evolution was the product of the use or disuse of organs that were acquired or lost during the lifetime, and that organisms acquired variations in the course of their lifetime, that those things could be passed on to their offspring. So, in other words, it was about the inheritance of acquired characteristics. We know now that this is not true. Unfortunately, Lamarck became best known for his one idea that was really wrong, other than the vast number of others that were absolutely right on with the thinking of the day and the thinking of today as well. So just so you realize that if you cut off the tails of rats, that doesn't mean their offspring are going to be born without tails. You'll still have to cut off the tails of those if you want to have tailless rats. This concludes the lesson about Darwin's theories.